How are you doing, Rob?
Yeah, good, thanks. All right, how are you?
It's good to see you in this weird way.
It's very strange. I tell you what's been nice though is people being able to attend things that they never would have been able to attend.
Are there any of the other? Is anyone else here done one of these Aberlin things?
I'm doing one in July.
Yeah.
I've seen a few, and I'm doing one in July.
What is it?
Sorry?
What is it?
Oh, it's like the Brazilian Linguistics Association has put together this gigantic collection of talks of people all across the world in association with the LSA and the LGB and other linguistics associations. And so I gave one last week, maybe. But it's really cool. So you give a talk, and there's literally thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't, as Rob was just saying, you go give a seminar somewhere and there's 30 people in the room, right?
Yeah.
So it's, and then it's on YouTube, and that means it's there forever. So it's kind of, I thought it was really cool, actually.
I'm doing one in July as well, but I'm very indecisive about what, because it's such a different kind of audience, so I haven't decided.
Yeah, I don't.
I went for something very poppy.
I saw, yeah, it looked really good, yeah.
It's kind of fun to do, yeah. And it was hilarious during the question period, and it was all about constructed languages and silly things and linguistics and like a very kind of like popular level. And then in the question period, someone said, "So David," the host said, "Oh, David, so there's a question here from Paola," and she says, "Do you consider the phi feature of gender to be instantiated on the little n head in languages which are set the DP parameter along Boskovich's lines?" Or something like this. And I was like, this is not the right question. I could have said no.
Are you thinking of Dothraki or?
Exactly. Dothraki or Klingon, right?
That's cool.
Okay, how are we? Just having a look now. We got some.
Got anybody?
People.
Yeah,
We've got quite a few people coming in now. Okay, I think we'll just give it a minute or two, and then we'll start.
I like the way that you can see the participants like logging up at the bottom.
Yeah, there's some familiar names. Okay, so just give it a minute. I'll say when it gets to 10:05, I think we'll start, and then I think a few more people will join us as we're starting. Okay. Right, so good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. My name is Rob Drummond, and I'll be chairing this Saturday morning shared English shared future session on Future Perfect, how applying linguistics in the real world moves the discipline forward. We're extremely lucky to be joined today by three prominent linguists in the form of Professors Devyani Sharma, Jennifer Smith, and David Adja. Now, obviously, we're keen to get this started as soon as possible. We'll just need to run through a couple of things about how this is going to all work. So you'll notice that you've all been muted. Hopefully, apart from the presenters, they've been unmuted, but everyone else has been muted. This is just to avoid lots of background noise. But you will have the chance to speak later if you'd like to. So in a couple of minutes, I'll introduce the speakers. After which they'll each speak for 15 to 20 minutes each. And that should leave us kind of 15, 20, 25 minutes for some questions and discussion at the end. The way the questions are going to work, if you've got a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A box. You should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen somewhere. Use that to type your question. And then my Manchester Met colleague, Dr. Erin Carey, is on hand to filter through those questions and try and kind of, if there's quite a lot of questions, she might theme them, put similar questions together and then send them over to me. She may also ask you if you would like to ask your question in person, live, or if you'd prefer me to do it, to go through the chair, and that's completely up to you. It'd be nice if people would like to ask their own questions, but completely understand. If you don't want to, for whatever reason, then I'll ask it on your behalf. If you, and yeah, that should be fine. And if you want to kind of add in to any discussion, that's absolutely fine. If you have a question during the talks themselves, if there's something you really don't quite understand, the speakers are more than happy to be interrupted just to explain something. So again, just put it in the Q&A box and Erin will see it. And if it's something we can easily clarify, then we'll make sure we do. So hopefully that's all clear. I'm just going to quickly then introduce who we've got speaking for us, and we'll take it from there. So David Adger, Professor of Linguistics at Queen Mary University of London, President of the Linguistics Association of Great Britain. He works on the syntax of human language and how syntax links to other aspects of language, including sociolinguistics, prosody, word structure, semantics, and pragmatics. His most recent book, published by Oxford University Press last year, is Language Unlimited, the science behind our most creative power. He'll be followed by Jennifer Smith, who's Professor of Sociolinguistics at the University of Glasgow. She works on language variation and change with a specific focus on how sociolinguistic norms are acquired in childhood and how they develop in later life. She is director of the Scots Syntax Atlas, an online resource for the study of Scots. And then we have Devyani Sharma, Professor of Sociolinguistics at Queen Mary University of London. Her research is on New English dialects, interethnic contact, bilingualism, accent variation, and language change. Her edited works include the Oxford Handbook of World Englishes, Research Methods in Linguistics, and English in the Indian Diaspora. She also directs the online public resources Teach Real English and Multilingual Capital. So I think that's everything. I think I'm going to hand over to David, and over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rob. Let me just share my screen. Oh, host disabled screens sharing, it says to me. Erin or someone, can you allow me to share my screen? There we go. PowerPoint, share. This is annoying. Sorry guys, this didn't happen yesterday. This is not good. Something is not allowing me to share this screen. It's telling me to leave the meeting first.
Oh.
Any of the hosts help me with this? Okay, I'm going to leave the meeting.
Oh. Should we fill the space? Fill the space with talk.
Yeah. Okay. So what should we chat about? It's very strange actually doing this because I can only see the 5 people. I know there's lots and lots of people watching this, but it always. I presume there's linguists everywhere now studying this whole new phenomenon of online meetings.
Absolutely, yeah.
There has to be, somebody has to be doing it, because the thing about getting no feedback from who you're speaking to is a very strange thing.
Yeah. And also the whole thing of taking the floor or not taking the floor, and those pauses and all of those things. Yeah.
Exactly.
Really.
There's hopefully something in. Right. Can we quickly unmute David again?
Yeah, let's try this again. It worked yesterday when Jen and Devyani and I tried it. I have no idea why it hasn't worked this time. Let's give this a go. Share screen, PowerPoint, share. Yay. Okay. Excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, now it works. Let me just close this up to here. So thank you very much, Rob, and thanks very much to English Shared Futures. As Rob said, what we're going to talk, our general title is Future Perfect, how applying linguistics in the real world moves the discipline forward. And what we're wanting to do in this is all three of us will talk a bit about how we bring linguistics into the classrooms. And we'll show how one way that can really help things is that it allows us to go beyond certain kind of boundaries that have been built up within linguistics. specifically the boundary between the more formal kind of approach to language and the more sociolinguistic approach to language, and how we can actually integrate these and how we need to integrate these to effectively bring linguistics into primary and secondary education. And I think that we all agree, all three of us, that doing this helps engage the public, and in the end, it also improves our discipline of linguistics. So we're going to talk about Singapore English, we're going to talk through Scots dialects, but we're going to start off with some monsters and aliens. So, I'm going to talk about the Queen Mary Invented Languages Scheme. So the purpose of this scheme is to use the idea of inventing languages from scratch to help with various kinds of things throughout the primary and secondary curriculum that teachers find difficult to engage students with. So part of this, the function of this is to help younger students with various aspects of English language at key stages 1 and 2, so skills in reading, writing, speaking, and at key stage 2, explicit knowledge of grammar, and how that we can use this at a later level to enhance and maintain this knowledge through key stage 3 and 4. And then finally, and this will connect a bit with what Devyani is talking about as well, how it can improve students' engagement with linguistic concepts at A level, especially in English language. So that's sort of the purpose of the scheme. There are some examples at work. This is the group of A-level students all working on making up their language. And we've now actually got this running in one way or another in about 50 odd schools. So the level of engagement varies very much between simply schools sending their students to specialized workshops to actually engaging in this within the curriculum. So I'll talk a little bit about some of those examples. So why constructed languages? Well, I'll give you an example here from Hildegard von Bingen. She was an abbess in the 12th century, I think, and she invented a language which she called lingua ignota. And for her, that was mainly for religious purposes. But it was one of the first examples that we know of in at least the Western history of linguistics, where someone has invented a language from scratch. Her language wasn't very sophisticated, but she did have a writing system, which you can see examples of here. It's very beautiful. And also, I think over 1,000 words. So that's one of the first constructed languages that we know of. And of course, much more relevant to our purposes in getting kids engaged with linguistics is, taking us right up to the present day, is the use of invented languages in entertainment. So everyone knows about the Elvish invented languages in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, which of course have been important from the book from the 60s and much more recently from the various films. And these are a way of, getting kids involved. I did a thing at a local comprehensive for World Book Day, where I got the kids to learn how the Elvish alphabet quotes works and got them all to write their names in that. And through doing that, well, Tolkien was a linguist, so the Elvish alphabet actually is not an alphabet, it's an abugida, and it involves knowledge of various articulatory points in the mouth. So they learned a bit of linguistics through the kind of fun job of figuring out how to write their name in Elvish. So, as I just said, why use constructed languages? Well, one good way is it's a way of leveraging students' interests. Not all students, some students are not nerdy enough for it, some students don't find it interesting, but actually my experience is that a lot of students can find something in constructed languages. So a really important thing, maybe the most important thing about doing this, is it allows students to be creative, creating their own languages with ideas that they haven't easily been able to be creative with before. So the way that, for example, phonological awareness is taught is kind of often quite boring, and kids don't find it very interesting. They actually have to read out sort of alien words, but they are not actually creating anything. The other thing about using invented languages to teach aspects of linguistics is it's massively flexible in content. So we've used this from really the youngest primary through to A level, as I said. And we can make it, or it can be made very flexible in timing. So I've done some sessions, they were a little bit challenging, in as little as 40 minutes, specialized workshop, to we've done a week-long intensive summer school. And actually, as I've said, we've also integrated this into full sub-modules in A-level curricula and in Key Stage 3 curricula, although COVID meant we haven't been able to implement that, unfortunately. So, and it's also easy, and this connects to what I said earlier on, as a way of allowing teachers to adapt what they do to the interest of their students. So, although we're doing things like grammar and sound, of course, when you're inventing a language, you can connect it to things like geography. Think of the maps in Tolkien's books. You can connect it to art, so we get the students to create their own writing systems, which they can then, you know, embellish artistically in the way they want. And you can connect it to poetry. There's all sorts of things you can do. It's very flexible and very, it's a very good way of trying to engage all the students. Why do this? So there are a number of people, Michael Rosen and others, have argued that the kind of formal grammar teaching that happens, especially in primary school, tends to stifle creativity, and there's widespread skepticism amongst teachers as to its value. And there's a lot of research showing that many teachers are not confident in knowing how to successfully engage students with aspects of linguistics. However, I mean, we come from the perspective that, you know, linguistics is about a central aspect of being human, language, and it can be made interesting and fun, and it should be. So, so those are the kind of fundamental reasons. I mean, linguistics, as people in this webinar might know anyway, is also a discipline that connects humanities, social sciences, and sciences. So it is something that brings in students who have different kinds of skills and different kinds of interests. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you all of the projects. We have many, many, many of them, but I want to do this fairly fast. Let me check my time. Oh, we're plenty of time. So we've done a number of projects working with the Center for Literacy in Primary Education, which is a charity which works to improve students' literacy. We've basically done that through doing training sessions for primary school teachers. And what we get them to do, which is something they can bring to the classroom, is something we call the map task. And we get them essentially to imagine a map of an island populated by monsters with various geographical features. And so that connects across their curriculum, you know, so they can do geography as part of this. And then, of course, they need to begin to give names to the various things on the island. So we then teach them a little bit about the different phonological spaces in the mouth, and phonetic spaces in the mouth, I guess. And then they learn how to create sounds and choose sounds. The last one we did, we actually got them to write on dice, on six-sided dice, the various consonants and vowels that they had chosen. And then they'd throw the dice, and that would give them syllables. Okay, so then they were easily able to make up quick syllables. They can then put the syllables together into words, and they can name a mountain or a river or a monster or whatever those words. So that gets them to really engage with notions of syllable structure as well. Of course, as time goes on, then we need to do things where, you know, they create sentences. Their monsters might want to say things to each other. They might want to write stories about their monsters. And then we bring in notions of subject, of noun, of verb, and so on. So they get all this, and they need to have those things in order to be creative. And, you know, so that seems to be kind of effective. So teacher feedback has been really great. Here's a poster from one of the alphabets that they made. So this is how you say shrug. So we have this device where we get them to make up an alphabet. They've already got a word for, say, mountain, and say that's shrug, okay? So then they draw mountains, and then they take that symbol of a mountain they've just drawn as the sound sh, which is the first sound of their word for a mountain. And as many of you probably know, that's not too far off from how the first writing systems, alphabetic or abjad writing systems, developed. So actually you can talk a little bit about the development of the Roman alphabet through doing this. And they essentially have created their own writing system. All right, so that's the primary one. Again, let me just check my phone. Good time. Okay, so we've also done another project, which is a summer school for Key Stage 3 and 4 students. And we've run this with a number of, as both a summer school at Queen Mary, where students came to us, we did that twice. And then we've also run it as workshops where we go out for 2 days, say, to a school. And we've done that with classes of, 90 students working in groups. And it's worked really well. Here's some examples of what the students have done making up their languages. It's a very similar task to the task we give at primary level, but obviously we make it much more sophisticated. So at that point, the students have to come up with their sound system, they have to come up with a writing system, they have to come up with words, they then translate something into the words. Most of the students then do some creative writing in it. So what you see in the posters here are cases where the students have done, say, creation myths for their culture and society that they've built up. And then they write out the creation myth in their alphabet, and they create a whole poster which sort of explains the world they've created, who their creatures are, what kind of language they speak. We bring in sociolinguistics into this. So, are there issues about gender? Does that relate to grammar? So we had amazing things like, different word orders depending on the gender of the speaker. And then someone raised the question about what about non-binary speakers, and they made that optional, and all sorts of really, really cool things at this age. And you can get into phonology, syllable structure, word order. We teach them some typology in this, so they have a sense of what kind of word orders are available. For some reason, they all totally love VSO word order. But you can see it's a way of really engaging students' creativity. I've gone through all of that. I just gave you that. So we're actually currently developing these materials into a full semester's worth of work at Key Stage 3, essentially. So first and second year of secondary school. This is partly because the teachers, talking to the teachers, become very, very clear that actually whatever knowledge the kids have managed to build up about language over the primary school, they lose during Key Stages 3 and 4, partly because the GCSE curriculum doesn't really focus on that. So this is a way that, so teachers are kind of concerned about this, and this is a way to help students maintain this in a creative and exciting fashion. And so we've got actually all the materials developed for the stuff at Woodfield School. We haven't been able to do it because we were meant to be doing it during April and May, but of course that didn't happen. All right, again, timing wise, all right, I'm not going to take much longer here. I'll just tell you one final project. It's not just one project, it's a number of projects where we're using the same approach to teach the frameworks part of A-level English language, which is essentially the part where in English A-level, the notion of frameworks is the notion that in linguistics we would normally think about as levels of language. So phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and then on top of that, issues to do with sociolinguistics, language, and so on. But mainly the frameworks bit is the structural aspects, and then in the other parts of A-level English, they do more sophisticated things on language acquisition, on sociolinguistics, on identity, and so on, depending upon the example. So, same thing. This time, we adapted something that I did with my undergraduates, where I kind of pretended that I was a TV producer, and we're giving them a brief to make up a language for a fancy TV program. So those materials were then adapted to work at A-level. So it's a great thing, they learn, one, what a brief is and how to work to it. And then during that brief, we can make it more and more sophisticated. So I send them things saying, hi, it's David, the producer here again. One of our characters is casting a spell and we need blah, 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 blah. And within that, we actually give them some fairly sophisticated grammatical ideas where they need to have learned, for example, what a subject is or how to do a relative clause or whatever within, so that they can actually do the translation task. So that's now being integrated into legacy materials, which are being used not just this year, but will be used in future. And actually, from the one school that we've got good feedback from so far, they've actually said actual student attainment, mean attainment, has improved in every area over what improvement was already expected. So we think that that's because it seems that the student engagement has improved. One of the teachers who's doing this told me that it was just amazing. Fairly unengaged students were sitting outside of class talking to each other about the language that they were making up and showing each other the writing systems they developed and asking each other what the words were, totally out of class. So he was totally amazed by that, and that seems to be fairly effective. Okay, so I've actually told you the fundamental ideas. Depending upon the level, we do things like reduplication. We tell them about Yimas' legendary past tenses. We tell them about the rarity of Hishkaryana, word order. We tell them about taboo. We bring in different kinds of orders of writing systems. And of course, a great thing about that is that often the students, at least the ones in London, and I'm sure elsewhere, especially in urban environments, come from places where English is not their first language. So the ones who are often kind of pulled out of English can bring in how their language works into this, which is another effective way of engaging. All right, I believe that I more or less said everything I need to say. I want to say thank you. I will stop sharing, and then I will pass on now to Jen.
Okay.
I hope you don't have the same problem I had, Jen.
Are you seeing that, folks? Are you seeing my screen?
No.
Oh, okay, let me try.
Oh, we are now.
Yay. Okay. And sorry, folks, I'm going to be, because with this view, you can't see what's coming next, you know, second guessing the slides that are coming next. So I'm going to be looking off to the side here. I want to just say it's not that I'm admiring myself in some mirror here. That's where I've got the other PowerPoint on my other laptop. So just in case you wondered what on earth I was doing, you know, when bloggers are kind of like this, now I see what they might be doing there. So thanks very much to the organisers for inviting us. We're really pleased to be here. I'm going to be taking a slightly different approach to David's. I'm going to be talking about general public engagement and then moving into possibilities for the future in the classroom. And we're moving from aliens and monsters to Scots. So David touched on this a little bit at the beginning about the idea of what is linguistics. And there's this often a perception that it's something quite hard, something quite difficult. But in actual fact, we have this inbuilt interest in linguistics. And whenever you, in any part of life, people are talking about linguistics. They might not know they're talking about linguistics, but they are. So, Love Island, how we miss it. Here is an article from The Conversation, tons of great articles in The Conversation on dialect, accent and dialect. Audience reaction shows deep snobbery about accents. And here is another one. Brad Pitt admits he panicked when coming up with his Irish accent for Snatch. Don't worry, Brad, you're not nearly as bad as Leo on the accents. You did not a bad job. So we're really, really talking about accent and dialect stuff all around us all the time. And in the context of Scotland, what you're getting in the last sort of probably 10, 15 years is a super heightened awareness and discussion of accent and dialect. And that clearly comes from the political, the social context that we're finding ourselves in, that changing, those changing political issues that have been going on the last sort of 10, 15 years. I hope, yeah. So here's one again in the conversation, how Twitter is helping the Scots language thrive in the 21st century. You're seeing a ton of Scots now on Twitter, a ton of representation of the Scots language. And here is an article from Highbrow, The Economist. Is Scots a language or merely a dialect? And David is actually interviewed for this article. And I'm very pleased to say it was David that said it was a dialect and not me. So let me just move this one up here. So again, all around us. And of course, it's not only in things like The Economist, you're hearing it all the time, people talking about it all the time. So pre-COVID, in the pub, I was logging in and listening in to a conversation next to me, and it was this one here, and somebody says, "Did you hear Lulu yesterday on the telly? Glasgow, what the?" He did finish that. She's fae Denniston. So this idea that someone's putting on this, you know, nobody from Denniston, a suburb of Glasgow, and quite a poor one, would be saying Glasgow. So he was absolutely tapping into that thing. So, and what you're also finding in Scotland, probably again around the last 10 years, is in more formal contexts, I suppose you could see it, issues of language coming in as well. So if you look at, here's the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum, and this is the landing page for it. And if you see in its tiny wee, sorry folks, here it says read in Scots. And if you press that button there, but I'm not going to do it, I'm just going to show you it. If you go through, you can find the other landing page in which all the information on the on Burns Birthplace Museum is in Scots. So it's a book that's bat, birthplace, o genius, ear lasting legacy, etc., etc. So what you're finding there is a lot more, as I say, this heightened awareness of Scots, and we're seeing much more Scots round about us, much more discussion about it. And that is partly, well, it's chicken and egg, I suppose, really, but certainly with things like this in the third sector, such as museums, etc., and the visibility of Scots comes from the Scots language policy of 2015, where the Scottish government set out a number of aims for making more visible the Scots language and for it being taught in the classroom that I'll talk about later. And a good example of that is, this is from the Scottish Government's website. And again, they have that Scots button. So here is the Scots language policy in Scots. You can read it in Scots as well. So we'll have all this discussion of Scots. It's certainly becoming much more visible now. But as with everything accent and dialect, there's a ton of mythologizing goes on about Scots. That's not particular to Scots. It happens all the time. So one of the myths is that Scots is this one monolithic thing. There is this thing called Scots. Another one is that Scots is what Burns spoke, for example. The proper Scots is spoken in Northeast Scotland, and the really bad Scots, and it's not Scots at all, is spoken in Glaswegian. All of these mythologies that you hear all the time. This is not particular to Scotland. And of course, often these myths, fact or fiction, come up because of lack of knowing what's actually in there. So with this in mind, one of the things we wanted to do in a project that I'm going to talk about now that we carried out between Glasgow, David in Queen Mary, and also Edinburgh University were involved in it as well, is the Scots Syntax Atlas. Now, David's mentioned syntax already a little bit, just in case anybody is not sure about that. Syntax is the order of the words in a sentence, very simply put. So I went there yesterday. That's one order. Did you go there yesterday? There's a change in order. And it's also to do with the shape of the word. So the verb be, I was, but you were, that shape of the word has changed. So we wanted to look at the syntax of Scots and the similarities and differences across Scotland. Now we had we came at it first of all from a theoretical viewpoint, but we also had a public engagement component in it as well. So here are some examples from the syntax of Scots. Oh, this is coming up at different times. Way up in Shetland, sorry Shetland for putting you in a box. I'm no been there before, instead of I've not been there before. I'm no been there before. In Glasgow, going to shout at me. Up there in the Western Isles, and himself is joining us for dinner. What like is the weather in the northeast? And down in the borders, a Mike can help you. So you get a ton of what we call syntactic or morphosyntactic or grammatical forms going on at that clause level structure. And we wanted to look at those both from a theoretical viewpoint, but also we wanted to do some public engagement with that through the resource we produced from this. So what we did to get the data, first of all, yes, we went to nearly about 150 locations in Scotland. We got locals from the community. They were mostly students at Glasgow and Edinburgh from the local communities to go up with a big questionnaire about what people did and didn't say. Can you say, I'm no been here or not? And we also interviewed people as well. We just recorded them talking. They were talking in pairs. So a big, big spread throughout Scotland. The middle part there is because we couldn't find like the 4 people that live in the middle of Scotland, right? No one actually lives there. So it's a fairly widespread. And we talked in each of the communities to older speakers and to younger speakers, because we also wanted to look at language change, this constant, tectonic plates moving in language. Nothing is ever standing still. It's always moving on. So we wanted to get a slice of that by looking at the younger and comparing the speech of the younger and older speakers. So if I go and show you, I'm going to just, I need to actually quit out of that. And I'll take you now to the Atlas resource, the online resource. You can tell I looked at a lot. Can you see that, folks? Is that? Yeah. Okay, so here is the Atlas. And in this resource, there's a resource for linguists that's got a lot of quite technical information in it, but there's also a resource for the general public. So I'm going to take you through to that now. So if we go through to explore the Atlas, and here we have on the sidebar here, a series of different sections. And if we just start with how do people speak in, I'll play you little extracts from there, and I'll play you one from, we'll go right from the southwest here and go right up to the north, up to Shetland. So I'll just quickly play those just so you get an idea of the kind of data we have.
These lasses, they meet one another when they're younger, and then they keep in contact until they're, say, about 40, kind of 50-year-old, but it's a lovely story. I don't want to say too much because I actually think you should go on and watch it. It's brilliant, so it is.
And that's not the one I wanted to play, so strike that. But that one's fine. Let's play Mabel, because I'm going to get back to this one.
Like yourselves, you went into an office and you learned a lot of stuff in an office. You had people there and you were to think, you were to use your brain. But I didn't. I went into a factory, and there's a difference there because you're in an office, well, it's part of your job and you need to learn the new technology. Mm-hmm. So in a way, you are in a learning curve all the time.
That's Mabel. And then we'll go up to Shetland, Lerwick, or Lerwick as they say there.
Every year, like we went in twos on the supper and made sure all the pies was hot and all that. And then we would ask some of our guests that we'd invited to come and help us.
So you can hear just from those two extracts, they sound quite radically different from each other. So what we wanted to do is look at those different syntactic forms across the country and compare and contrast through a series of questions that we asked our participants in the study. So this one here, who says what, where, it goes through a number of examples and shows you who says what, where. So let me get rid of that one. So if you have a look at something like, I'm needing a cup of tea. So you get this classic thing in Scots where with stative verbs, so want, need, like, etc., you get them in ing forms. And the really interesting thing about this, so instead of I want a cup of tea, I need a cup of tea, I'm needing a cup of tea. And the really interesting thing about this form is that folk aren't aware that that's a Scots form and they don't know they're using it, right? So we wanted to see, everyone talks about this use of statives as progressives in Scots. Let's see if everyone is doing it across the country. So, and the dark dots mean they say it, and the lighter the dots, they mean they're less likely to say it. So let me get that in there. So you can see here that across the whole of Scotland, people are using that form. They're accepting that form. They say, yeah, I would say that. It's not specific to any area at all. Totally below the level of consciousness, but everyone is doing it. But then if we have a look at something like, gonna you leave us alone? That one I showed you earlier. Let's have a look at that one. And you can see that if we go into, for example, if we go in a little bit here, it's really concentrated around the central belt. People in the Northeast are like, what? Absolutely not. Actually, they wouldn't say what, they'd say fet. Absolutely nay. Nae saying that at all. So here it's really concentrated in the central belt. So you can go through, there are quite a number of examples you can compare and contrast, and you can compare the speech of older people to younger people, etc. And what we also have here, and I'm going to start hurrying up a little bit now, is what we've called stories behind the examples. So this is when we look in more depth at these particular structures we're looking at. So the woman I played you earlier from Mabel, she said, use it in a learning curve. She kept repeating this use. And this is the plural you, use. So if we have a look at that one, where is that one? Oh.
It's up the top, Jen, like third.
It's at the top.
Yeah.
Use it in a learning curve. There we are. Let's have a look at that one. So basically on the right-hand bar here, it takes you through a little bit of the background of that. So this is what we mean by the stories behind it. I'm just going to quickly go through here. And then who says use? So we can look first of all at the older speakers. This is across the whole of Scotland, older and younger. Let's have a look at the older speakers. And you can see that if I go back, sorry, if we look across everyone, it looks like it's fairly widespread across Scotland, right? There's slightly lighter ones, slightly darker, but fairly widespread. But if we have a look just at the older speakers, we see more light dots, particularly around the northeast and more north, and they're not going near it there in Shetland at all, right? So in the older speakers, really a concentration here, and some one or two dotted around elsewhere. And when we look at the younger speakers, we see quite a different picture, where there's many more darker dots, many more younger speakers are saying, I say use. So what that shows you is language change in real time. The older generations, it's really around the central belt. In the last sort of 20, 30, 40 years, it's completely spread throughout the country. So it gives you a real insight into the language change that's ongoing in the here and now. Okay, there's many other things on that, but I'll leave that at the moment and go back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so that is the, there we are. So that's the Scots Syntax Atlas. And it was quite successful. We had a lot of hits on it, a lot of media interest, a lot of people writing to us about it. But that is really based on consumption. People aren't contributing in any way. Production, sorry, there's the postie. Somebody else can let him in. It's really on consumption. And we wanted to do something that would move to production and much more interaction in use. And in particular, we wanted to focus that on schools. We want to focus that on schools. So the Scots language policy that I talked about earlier has a particular focus on education and bringing the teaching of Scots into education. And the two key things are, the one key thing is resources to do that. Teachers are stretched. Within the Scottish context, there is no such thing as a higher in English language. It doesn't exist as a separate qualification. So there's a whole load of problems with making that aim happen, getting into the classroom. So it was with this in mind that we have proposed a digital resource coming from the Scots Syntax Atlas, but it's going to be highly interactive, involves production from the kids, them actually using the resource here. So create a series of interactive online activities which look at production and perception, what people think of the different dialects round about them. Generate a dynamic digital resource which compares and contrasts users' own and others' production and perception. So very much interaction, a resource that looks good. I think if you want to engage kids, you have to have something that looks good, but importantly as well, a resource which comes ready-made, that teachers have a toolkit that doesn't involve them in a lot of having to do the work. It comes ready-made for the kids to zoom in and start using it. So that's a number of amazing promises, and we haven't actually done it yet, I should say that. So I'm going to quickly go through the kinds of things that would be on here. This is not something new. People have done this before. Rob, you know this only too well. You've done tons of things. So what's the word you use for this kid here? Bairn, child, kid, Wayne. I say bairn, in Glasgow they say Wayne, and if anybody says child, no one would talk to them. Here's a nice one from you, Gov, on dinner versus tea, or if you say supper. We could do audience participation now if this was normal circumstances, but we can't. And you can also do it with pronunciations, foot or cut. This is from Manchester University. And what you do with that is you then are able to pick apart the speech patterns that you're looking at. You really get into the linguistics of that. This is production. You also look at perception, where you can ask overtly, do you like that accent or do you prefer that accent? And you can also be, and Rob, this was reported on your work for Manchester in one of the newspapers. But you can also look at perception much more covertly, asking underhand type questions to get a handle on what people think of the different accents and dialects. And we know that has a very, very powerful effect on our everyday lives, the linguistic prejudices that exist. So that is the plan, to take this into schools. We're going to pilot it with language ambassadors first of all, and then roll it out more widely throughout Scotland in the coming months. So we want to extend the depth and reach of provision in the teaching and learning of Scots, but more importantly, and David talked about this as well, provide a fuller understanding of that most crucial of human abilities, language, and the part that it plays in shaping our identity in the 21st century. Thank you, and I'm sorry if I've gone over.
That's great, thank you. Just before Devyani starts, so just remind people about asking questions. You're more than welcome. I realise time might be short to the end, but we can hang on a little bit and answer as many as we can. But of course, the sooner they come in, the easier it is for us to kind of direct them to the right people. I'm just worried that if everyone asks questions right at the end, we're going to have a bit of a problem trying to work out which ones to deal with. So feel free, as people are talking, just put the questions in the Q&A box, and Erin will help sort them out. Sorry, Devyani.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'm going to pick up on quite a few themes that David and Jen have talked about. I might shorten my talk slightly. I'll try and end around 11 because it's always frustrating not to have time to actually chat about interesting stuff that comes up. Jen is saying something. Okay, I'll share my screen and get started. Oh no, sorry.
So is it not working for you now?
Let me just try again. Yeah, it's again like David. I'll just try again. Ooh. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about, in a way, the resources that I'm going to talk about are kind of complementary to the kind of thing David does, because we are much more we're primarily sociolinguistics focused in these resources and A-level focused, but hopefully you'll see that there are these similarities in how we end up talking about all of linguistics in order to make the kind of try to achieve the goals we want to achieve. So we have a resource that we've been working on for some years with teachers on to provide research-based materials for their use in A-level English language teaching, and we call it Teach Real English. And we've tried to cover core AQA and similar exam board themes. So we have these 6 broad themes in the materials that we provide teachers with: spoken London English, language and gender, discourses and attitudes, language and the media, language change, and language diversity. These are directly taken from AQA priorities. And Jen had mentioned the need, and also David, the need to package materials into little chunks that can just be taken ready-made. This is something teachers really highlighted to us. So we're trying to kind of balance a certain amount of detailed content of what we find in our research, because one of the reasons we do this is that teachers said, they teach a lot of old classic sociolinguistics, and they want to, Rob knows this very well, he does a lot of this as well, that they need updated sociolinguistics research and English language variation research. So we create these kind of things we call teaching units that I'll show you a couple of. And then we also provide suggested projects, language investigations for students. We have a linguistics research digest and a glossary. A lot of this, this was started by Jenny Cheshire, specifically focused on multicultural London English. So you can see spoken London English as the first one, which is the first resource that was created. And then we've been expanding the materials. So I might just show you the website and see if it works, just to show you how it's set up. So this is the website. Can you see that? We have these different, we have the themes with different teaching units. The Linguistics Research Digest has research summaries, so easy to read summaries of linguistics research for students and teachers to use. And I'll just navigate to, if we go into language diversity, I'll be talking about a couple of these teaching units to show you how we set up the materials, but also what we're trying to do in terms of sharing linguistics insights. It relates a lot to what David and Jen have been talking about, which is that there's this deep and complex knowledge that all of us have. And one of the fun things about doing this kind of thing is just bringing it to people's attention, making people realize what's out there. Okay, so overall in the teaching units, I won't go through all this, we embed various recent research in the form of these teaching units. I hope you can see this. I'm going to talk about two of them, which relate to African American English and Singapore English, to give you a sense specifically of two of the units that focus more on syntactic variation, which is kind of a theme in our panel, and how the social and the formal can't really be separated in what we talk about. So both of these teaching units, or TUs, are a English around the world theme. And in the next few slides, there'll be a lot of text because I'm showing you the kind of text that we give teachers. So I'll skip over some of the details, but this is the text that's in the teaching unit. So teachers have a kind of guide to follow. One of the things they said is useful is if they're going to teach something about Singapore or African American English, they like to have a little background because it allows them to be able to contextualize without doing a lot of reading and preparation. So, so the way we kind of contextualize these two teaching units is that English is no longer, of course, a British language exclusively, not even American and other native varieties. It's spread right across the globe. And so we look at two very geographically distant and also historically separated varieties. And the two things that we focus on in the units and that I'll talk about now are systematicity in the dialects and also the social process of switching on and off those systems. Okay, so the first example I'll talk about is, you can see this yellow circle. So it's African American English, and what we'll hear was recorded in California. So at one end of this, at least traditional map that we use. So teachers get a background initially. Where did African American English, vernacular English come from? Reminding teachers and students that a lot of their lexicon is African American English. So it's not just a variety that is out there or that they may feel unconnected to UK. A lot of language, you know, it's one of the varieties that's contributed the most to the English lexicon ages ago, a century ago and now. But we also highlight upfront this kind of unique status of African American English with its very high prestige in the narrow area of popular culture and its great stigmatization that it experiences in the US. So it's something that should focus the attention of a lot of students. So, you know, the majority of students in British schools, you could say, speak a variety that is not standard English. And this is one thing where they can kind of recognize this is a variety they hear a lot in popular culture. They may not have be connected to it. They might recognize the issue of stigmatization. Introduces a number of different things to talk about with students. So I'm going to show you some of the data we provide. So one of the things teachers find helpful is to have audio material. So a lot of our teaching units give teachers transcripts and audio. I better speed up. But I'll just show you, okay, I'm gonna have to get out of the full screen mode to get my audio. So I'll just play you a little clip so that you can hear a contrast in this speech. So this is a preacher, speaking to other preachers actually. It's a very particular kind of lecture that she was giving. So I'll just play a little bit of an early part of the lecture.
There is a secret legacy of depression among women who preach. It's acted out in private moments when we cry alone.
So yeah, I won't play the whole thing. What we, in our guidance notes, one of the things we ask teachers to point out, there's this very performative style, but one of the things to note is highly standard syntax. So if you want to break down the syntax, you see the lexicon and syntax are of a very formal style. So later on in her speech, she shifts to talking about a personal experience with stray dogs. So when she says yard dog, it's a stray dog. And she uses it to give a message related to a message in the Bible about courage in the face of danger, but she gives it in a humorous way using this personal experience.
You can tell the difference between somebody's pet and a yard dog. Pet been taken care of. Pet ribs ain't showing. Pet don't have no mange on it.
So whether or not students can actually point to them, everything changes within a single speech here. So her syntax changes, her phonology changes, even her voice quality at the end of the final line, her voice quality changes. I'll just point out one detail and then contrast it with Singapore English. We provide the teachers with these detailed descriptions of the kind of syntax that we're seeing in this kind of an extract. But one of the ways we do it is to show that certain similar constructions are not allowed in the grammar of African American English. So you can say pet been taken care of, but you can't say it can be tough to have pet. Okay, so you can omit the or with certain types of noun phrases, but not others. And then we also highlight that in standard varieties that so students might say, oh, this is lazy speech, or anybody might say, and this is just dropping your the's and us, but of course in standard English we don't, but of course we do, but it's much more restricted. So we say at church, playing piano, things like that. And we do this for many other syntactic constructions in African American English. But if teachers would like to, they can, we give them questions for discussion as well, students. So what's distinctive? How do we know they're not mistakes? Because we heard her using completely standard English, and we ask them to think about why she might have that kind of shifting. But the materials also provide a similar type of example from Singapore in Southeast Asia. I'm not going to go through it in detail. We give them background. Here we have very vernacular speech in red. So things like got time we can. Singapore English has very, very different syntax. But then later, again, like the preacher, we see the same people arguing in completely they're having an argument at that point. And you can see the same person who said got time we can, saying she's 45, she has 2 kids, she's the one who's been trying, completely standard. Okay, so again, like the preacher, we show this is not because they can't speak correctly, it's because they have 2 dialects. But I'll just point out one detail. So here we see, excuse me, cannot even promote holiday in front of him, ma. So here you can say promote holiday. In African American English, you cannot say drop that article. So we give teachers, it's a bit detailed, but we give teachers and we give guidance notes that you can show that if you just pretend to be speaking a dialect and drop your articles, you'll get it wrong because these are complex systems. And here we show 2 vernaculars with different rules about noun phrases. And then we give them again discussion points and questions. So again, you know, even though they're completely geographically separated, there are some very clear parallels, and also in terms of syntax, native speaker differences. So all I've tried to highlight, sorry, I'm speeding through so that we have time, is the kind of resource that we've created, and it's used quite extensively in schools around the UK now. The goals being to provide raw audio and real research-based materials, but in a packaged format and of recent research. But with these 2 examples, I tried to highlight, first of all, that English is shifting centers of gravity now. These are major, new, nativized, in the case of African American English, not new, centers of gravity. Also the importance of understanding multi-style competence for respect for dialect speakers, for understanding that that it's a choice to use these styles, and also that dialect grammars have a complexity that only native speakers or proficient speakers of those dialects can use. So hopefully you can see that to make quite a social point, we need phonetics and syntax in some detail, and together these make the best case for complex competence when trying to share real English, as we call it. Okay, so neurotically I've put discussion themes in case no one had anything to say, but thanks.
That's great. Thanks ever so much to everyone. I mean, that was really interesting, and I've learned loads myself, and there are some things we want to ask you separately. I was privately messaging Erin a couple of times there to saying we really need to get hold of how Jen created that map for our own work. That looked fantastic. So there are a few questions, and some people have asked that kind of we ask on their behalf, and some people have said they're willing to be unmuted and ask live. So I'll just deal with there was one that came early on from somebody called Liz, and she was asking about, it was during David saying that she's really keen to act on the ideas being presented. How can I persuade other teachers to give up some GCSE time to teach linguistics? And what do you think would be the most persuasive point, I guess, in terms of, what would be the key thing, do you think would be a key argument in persuading teachers who maybe aren't familiar that linguistics and English language study in general is a useful thing to do? So I don't know if anyone wants to pick up on that.
I mean, can I pick up on that first, just because, like, I mean, it seems to connect directly with the stuff that I was talking about. I mean, for us, what transpired in discussing things with, we ran a summer school, talked a bit to the teachers afterwards. What transpired is that their big concern was that the kids, especially kids coming up now, have done all of this spelling and grammar stuff during the primary school, but then within the GCSE curriculum, especially at Key Stage 3 and 4, it kind of just gets left. And then that means they both get bored of, actually that's the wrong word. It means that they don't really know that stuff, so that by the time they come to think about their A-level choices, English language, for example, is not an interesting choice for them because there's not very much of it in GCSE. They have a very dim memory of doing it, like, in primary, and maybe not well. So I think it has a downward depressing effect on it. That has a downward depressing effect. The awfulness of the GCSE from a language perspective has a depressing effect on A-level applications or A-level take-up for English language, and probably for the joint as well. So I think that that's a practical thing, which is that if you can say to your teachers, actually getting the kids to maintain interest in these things will not only actually improve the 20% or whatever it is of the GCSE that has SPAG in it, it will also mean that they will be interested enough to take on English language at A-level. That might be one good direction if your school offers English language A-level, obviously. So that's one that we found quite effective. It does seem bad to just do all this work in Key Stage 1 and 2 at primary school and then just lose everything. Right, so that I think might be, I mean, that has been one of the things that the teachers we've worked with have said that's their concern. So that might be some other people's concern as well. Okay,
thanks. And Jen, did you want to say something?
And if I can just add to that as well, because it is well, there's a couple of things. We don't want to come in as smarty pants academics, let us tell you about linguistics. There's that. And also certainly in the Scottish context, there's that thing of the point that, is it Liz, made about the time. How do you find time to do that? What are the resources available to do that? There are all of those things going on. But I think what we've been doing in the last few years as academics is we've been much better at going and asking teachers what it is they need, rather than us telling them what we think, about this really exciting subject of ours. And certainly in the Scottish context, what they want, Devyani touched on this as well, are those pre-packaged toolkits that takes the heat off them in a way, right? And also what David talked about, where the pupils themselves are the resource. Rather than it coming, let me tell you about this, them looking at what they can do themselves. And it's us finding a way to be able to provide the materials that can do that, I think is really, really key, both for the teachers and for the pupils.
Okay, thank you. I've got a quick question. I think this will be a quick one. We're going to go for going to attempt a live one. Erin, is that all right? And so this is, I think it's Jan. I'm going for Jan. Looking at the surname, I'm going for pronunciation Jan. Sorry, I've got that wrong. Can we unmute Jan?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks very much to all the presenters for 3 very, very interesting talks. I've got a question for Jennifer. Having lived in Northern Ireland for over a quarter of a century, I was fascinated by how many of the examples that you used were very familiar to me from, the kind of language I hear around me every day. Use is one example, it's a lovely day, so it is. It's just pure Ballymena. So I was just wondering, looking at the maps that you showed, it looks as if your research does not take in Northern Ireland or Ulster Scots, whichever way you want to put it. And I'm just wondering, is that the case? And if it doesn't, why not?
Yeah, those are very good questions. And we know there's 2 different pathways between Northern Ireland and Scotland. One, the Scots going over there during the plantation period, etc. And then later migrations of coming from Ireland to Glasgow and then moving up or down into Ayrshire and up through the Central Belt. So you get a 2-way thing going on, and hence you get many, many shared things. So for example, we've got another example in there. She's after buying a house. You know that comes from a calque with Irish Gaelic. So you find it around Glasgow, but you also find it in the Highlands of Scotland, and that comes from the calque with Scottish Gaelic. So immediately with that one example, you see the really big complexities. But you're absolutely right. In some cases, Northern Ireland is included because of this, lots of the Scots input, etc. But we just thought it was too much too much. We'd bitten off more than we can chew. We had originally thought we'd do that, but decided to set it aside. And there's certainly some brilliant work done on Northern Ireland by a bunch of linguists. So, but good question, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to try Kate. Is that all right?
Hi there. Thank you very much, everyone. It's absolutely fascinating. Is there a case for making a separate GCSE for linguistics that maybe incorporates English language and literacy things, as well as bringing us a bit closer to modern foreign languages, which are struggling? So, perhaps David, I think you said you were...
A very brief answer to this. So when I was president of the LGB, I think I sent Rob and my interpreter an old biography. Caroline Haycock is the current president since January. But when I was president, we've been working, we have an education committee, the Committee for Linguistics and Education, that we share with the British Association of Applied Linguistics. And we have been looking very hard at, we were for a while at linguistics at A level. And because we thought that would be easier than doing GCSE, but with the idea of bringing it to GCSE, and it was a nightmare. So I think we all think it'd be a great idea, but actually getting through to the exam boards and working with the exam boards to bring that on, and with the government, has just been, I mean, when we tried it before, it was brick wall, brick wall, brick wall. So I think maybe Devyani or Jennifer have something else to say, but like, I would love that to happen, but I think it requires so much resource, I mean, so much personal time to try and do it, that currently it's just very, very difficult.
Sounds
frustrating. A quick comment on that, just about one of the effects. I mean, when Jen, and in relation to the first question, we were talking about how to help teachers find time to fit in these themes. One of the things I learned before we did Teach Real English I did an earlier thing where I was working on bilingualism, and we had a package of awareness about bilingualism, and I was supposed to go into a school to talk about it. And at the last minute, the teachers said, sorry, we really can't fit it in because it simply does not fit in the curriculum. Bilingualism, which is a majority, you know, cognitive state of humans. So even if we don't get linguistics in, I think there are issues with what story students get, you know, children get as they grow up about, you know, if that whole thing is missing. It falls in between. So, and the other thing I just wanted to mention is that something David mentioned, that GCSE has become very, has lost a lot, it's lost language variation elements. And it seems almost like that might be an area to work on and fix and keep making a case and insert a little bit of linguistics awareness, even if it's not a whole subject, because something's gone wrong. Yeah.
Also lost a lot of spoken stuff has been taken out of GCSE, which of course, you know, creates a downward pressure on looking at variation, looking at how people use language. So I think it's, you know, things that, I mean, since the Govian reforms, things have not gone in a good direction from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Agnieszka, I think. Yes, so yeah, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for all three very interesting presentations. My question, because I work for the Arts and Humanities Research Council, is a little bit about the research chicken and egg situation in applied context. And you've already touched about it a little bit, Jennifer, by saying that you're much better at going and asking teachers what they need before you embark on the project. But in reference to the three projects that you presented today, and also to your project in Manchester, Rob, I was just wondering, did you identify your research questions, your research themes first, and then went to see how you could sort of make a practical impact through the project, or did the themes and questions came up as a result of your interactions with teachers? Thank you.
Shall I give a brief example from ours? So when Jenny Cheshire initially started this engagement, it was the research followed by engagement, because she was working extensively on multicultural London English. Then she started working with teachers, but then she and her team applied for follow-on funding that was led by what their conversations with teachers. So it was both, first one, then the other.
And it was the same, Agnieszka, with, you'll know if you've worked with HRC, the one I talked about today. We initially had the much more theoretical questions. It always had a public engagement component, but now we want to try and expand that significantly in the follow-on funding. So we love follow-on funding.
Oh, David, can someone quickly on this?
Just very briefly on the Conlang stuff. So that's a little bit different from the other two projects in some ways. And so a lot of that draws on research which we did in the department, which was not really focused on an educational side of things. So it drew on my research with Kiowa and Scottish Gaelic, on Copa Van Ert's research and Fijian and damn, another language I've forgotten, and so on. So we actually took research on endangered languages, which we do a lot of in our department, on the syntax of those languages. And of course that feels like it doesn't have any way to easily connect with outside of those particular communities. But then I kind of, so we had this idea, like our syntactic analyses of these essentially are, oh, these are like choice points in the grammar, and like, you know, it's like a parameter, does it do this or do that? And we had all these parametric analyses. And I'd been asked to invent a language for a TV program. And I was inventing this language for this TV program. And I was like, this is just like flipping that. You take that notion, which you use in analysis, build a theory where you've got these choice points, then why don't we take these choice points and create a language out of them? And that's something that we could then use in education. So it was more of all of that research, which seems to be about something entirely different. If you just think about it in a slightly different way, it allows you to go like, we can use the ideas behind that to do something which would be helpful in education. So for me, it worked kind of in a different way around, but those projects were actually funded by the HRC, so thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Now, I'm aware of time, but I'm more than happy to carry on dealing with a few questions if people are, if that's okay with the panelists.
Rob, could I just say one thing?
Yeah, go on.
Tried to answer one of the questions by typing. It was Naomi's question on URLs for the project, but it's not letting me do that for some reason. So just to say we can supply all of the websites, etc., or any of the presentation. Well, certainly me, I don't mind supplying the presentation, etc., and the websites. But I don't know why it's not letting me reply there. It's not stopping.
I don't know. We obviously didn't trust you, Jen. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. So
I'm very happy to work with schools who want to do this Conlang thing. Just email me.
Okay, so if it's all right, I'm just going to get the nod from Becky. I'm all right to just go on for another 5 minutes or so if people want to. Great. Obviously, the beauty of an online thing is you can sneak out and you don't look awkward, kind of gathering your bags and moving chairs. So it's fine. But I've got it because I've got quite a really important question actually from Barbara Blayman. Okay, I'm going to read it for you. It says, we're in a particular historical moment where all language study has been taken out of GCSE, and as a result, this has discouraged teachers from doing it at Key Stage 3. The emphasis at Key Stage 2 has been on naming and labelling rather than understanding, thinking, investigating, enjoying, because of government edict and intervention. In the past, there was a strong interest in schools for knowledge about language for its own sake, through LINC, the work of Ron Carter and many others. Okay, here's the question. How do you think linguists could and should intervene in national debate at a national policy level to bring the kind of structural changes that will validate more language study in schools? So, who wants to tackle that one? Go on, Jen.
So it's a great point, and I think the key issue is show, don't tell, and that's for us. So don't tell policymakers that, you know, it's a very important thing. We have to do it by showing that that's the case. And how do we do that? By going into schools and doing the types of things that we talked about today. So that's all I wanted to say on that.
I agree. I totally agree with Jen. I think it's an incredibly difficult thing. I mean, I think you absolutely need the bottom-up stuff that Jen was talking about. You do need top-down pressure, and that's the job of our learning societies, which we attempt to do. I mean, we meet with the Department for Education and so on. But it's frustrating, I think. But I think Jen's fundamentally right. We do excellent work, and the more our community of academics does that excellent work, engaging with teachers, showing them how we're useful to what they want to do, and giving them the capacity to say, wow, this is great stuff. We'd like to do more of this, and just creating pressure from both sides. But as Barbara well knows, this is an incredibly challenging thing to do, and especially right now, it's an incredibly challenging thing to do because priorities are elsewhere, because universities are going to be under all sorts of pressures, which it's not clear that language is really going to be very important in those pressures. And I just think we have to do our best.
A quick comment just about from a personal perspective. We had at the last LAGB conference, we had a session on education, and we were talking about the declining numbers of A levels for English language, English literature. This year they improved, which was
yay.
But we were talking about that, and one thing that came up, and then right around that time I had this experience of it, was that actually linguistics and English language awareness in general is very relevant for STEM subjects as well, and in a way there are further arguments we could be making. So I got this email from a professor in engineering, I think, a year ago, and he said, I want to know more about applied linguistics, because one of the biggest problems I have in terms of career progression and even success in doing science is students understanding genre, like there are different, and he said, I keep basically teaching a kind of linguistics, and is there any way? And it made me realize we tend to focus within our, the humanities, whichever area our type of linguistics is in. But STEM, it made me realize, the fact that he contacted me saying, can you help me? I want to run classes for science students, not just writing well, but understanding when to write in what way and how. It's very applied, but it's something we discussed, that maybe a way to tap into government priorities is actually also that if you have sciences students, that awareness and understanding of language structures is something that supports academic skills. And, you know, so it was just an interesting conversation that started as another way to get in and make the case.
Okay, right, thank you very much. I'm aware there are more questions, but I'm also aware that we've used up quite a lot of people's time on Saturday morning. I'm going to bring it to a close there, but the discussion is carrying on Twitter with the English Shared Future. Hannah, there's also the discussion forum. So huge apologies if we haven't got around to your question. We tried to do as many as we could. But thanks ever so much to our panelists, Professor Devyani Sharma, Professor Jennifer Smith, and Professor David Adja. Thanks also to my colleague, Dr. Erin Carey, for helping with the questions. And thanks to everyone for coming and for, you know, for asking such useful and intelligent questions. It's a discussion that we'll carry on. And so I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.